Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the station or the host. Folks, I have a really special guest with me today, and I am really excited because, in my own opinion, we need to talk about the uncomfortable topics. We need to talk about the uncomfortable situations that happened in our history. And people don't like to talk about it, but we shouldn't forget because it should not be repeated. And with me today, I am just really excited to have Chris Campion on. He is a British author, journalist, and editor. Chris Campion has written for publications that include The Guardian, The Times UK, Los Angeles Times, Rolling Stone, NME, Dazed and Confused, and Vice. He is an archivist for the estate of Bud Lee, the editor of The War is Here, and contributes an essay on Bud Lee and the story behind the photographs entitled On Avon Between Badger and Livingston. And I just want to say a little about Bud Lee, whose photographs are in this book, The War is Here. Bud Lee was a self-taught photographer who first took up a camera professionally in the military and received fine art training at the National Academy in New York. Between 1967 and 1974, he worked for Life, Esquire, Rolling Stone, the Sunday Times, and many other publications, somehow finding himself at the center of some of the biggest stories of the time. Chris Campion, I want to welcome you to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Betsy. Thank you very much for asking me on.
You are welcome. The war is here. Folks, you know how I am about book covers, as the audience has heard me. The cover right on right from the get-go, Chris, is just, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? This book, The War is Here, is worth more than 1,000 words. This book was so profound and heart-touching to me. What I did was I read the pictures. Well, I didn't read the pictures. I looked at the pictures first and then went back and I read. Because I love looking at pictures and taking my time. It's just incredible. I am from New Jersey. I lived in New Jersey most of my life, and I don't remember the riots. I knew there were riots. I was 9 years old at the time. My mom, who's 93, I asked her. She didn't remember. But I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for writing this book. Well, you didn't write it, that you organized it. You were an editor for the book. And I want to thank you for compiling this book together. And I'd like to know, how did you get interested in Bud Lee's work?
Well, I was actually researching a completely different subject and just stumbled upon Bud Lee's images in Esquire. And had never heard of him. I was pretty taken by the images that I'd found, and so I contacted his family, learned a lot more about him, and we actually started work on another book entirely that was really just a survey of his work between 1967 and the mid-'70s. He had taken photographs for Life and Esquire and Rolling Stone, as you mentioned. He'd photographed the funeral of Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlanta in 1968. He'd photographed the funeral of Bobby Kennedy in New York. He took photographs of protests against the Vietnam War in New York and in D.C. A lot of very pivotal moments he captured in images, certainly the late 60s, kind of a very dramatic, tumultuous time in American history. So we were working on a book that was, like a survey of his work. He also did album covers for Al Green. He photographed James Brown, photographed actors, photographed Andy Warhol. So it was a very rich body of work. But while we were working on, trying to sort of put that book together, a publisher we were working with at the time suggested that we instead switch and do a book on the Newark photos that Budley took, because it was a very contained body of work. It offered a much more sort of concise introduction to who he was as a photographer. So we basically switched, and I started working with the Newark photos, many of which so basically he was sent to Newark by Life magazine. They ran maybe about 10 or 15 images in a couple of different articles in the magazine, and also used one of his images on the cover of Life in 1967. But there were 350 images in total, so most of them had never been seen before. So we basically just sort of took those images and tried to construct a story around them that sort of spoke about Budley's time in Newark and really what was going on in the city at that time and how it affected the people who were living there. That's kind of basically how the book sort of came about.
I found it very ironic in reading about Bud Lee that he was in the military service, but he didn't see combat, and then he's out of service and he's witnessing sort of like a war here in America.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that struck me too, is that, and honestly, I don't know if he was that prepared for it, having never seen combat as a military photographer. He was stationed in Europe, so in the early 60s. So, there was no war there in Europe. He was taking photographs for Stars and Stripes magazine. But yeah, they were just, he took, I think I remember there's one article that he did for Stars and Stripes that's about the Louvre in Paris. So, he really wasn't even taking photos related to the military either. He won the Military Photographer of the Year award for a series of photos, or for a photo that he took of soldiers in training, and that's how he caught the attention of Life magazine photo editor Peggy Sargent, who headhunted him to start working for the magazine. So he, was, I don't know, maybe 6 months after he started working for Life, he got the call to go to Newark, not really realizing what he was in for, that he was essentially walking into a war zone. And I think it affected him deeply, the things that he experienced and that he saw there. But he was not necessarily prepared for it.
I would think that he, wouldn't be prepared for it, and I can imagine the post-traumatic that Bud Lee had of what he witnessed, which, of course, post-traumatic wasn't discussed at that time. He was in a predicament I don't think he expected to be in. And the pictures, I have to tell the audience, folks, this is like to me it's a coffee table book. Nice, large book with large photographs, and each photograph, I'm telling you, is heart-touching. And I can just, if I were to put myself in Bud Lee's place, I would have been heartbroken, especially with that young boy, Joey Bass. To see a young boy laying there on the ground and no one helping him, and seeing this young boy sucking his thumb on a stretcher, no one near him. As a mother, as a former nurse, that broke my heart, Chris. I was like almost in tears looking at that picture. Pictures.
Yeah, they're very. I mean, I should explain. So while Bud was in Newark, he was basically, moving around the city trying to find things to photograph for Life magazine. But the city was pretty much locked down by the time he got there. The National Guard had been brought into the city. There was a curfew in place. There were roadblocks in place to sort of, basically limit movement around the city, and people couldn't go in, they couldn't go out. And I think the second day that he was there, or the first full day that he was in Newark, he and the reporter from Life, Dale Whitner, met these young guys on the street, and one of them was named Billy Furr. He was 24 years old. He had recently been laid off from his job at a bakery in Newark and had come in to pick up his unemployment check and got stuck there because the city was locked down. So it was a hot Saturday afternoon, height of summer, mid-July. So Billy and his friends decide to go into a corner liquor store that had already been looted, and bring out some beer for the people who were out on the block. And so Budley photographed them going in and out of the store. And no sooner had they left the store with the beer than a police car came screeching to a halt on the sidewalk. Two of the guys basically dropped to the ground. Billy Furr ran with a six-pack of beer in his hand, and the police jumped out of the vehicle, the patrol car, raised their shotguns, and fired and shot Billy Furr in the back and killed him. And those bullets that they had fired at Billy Furr also hit a 12-year-old boy named Joey Bass Jr., who was playing at the intersection, the next intersection. So Bud Lee photographed all of these events as they were happening in front of him. And the photo that you refer to was used on the cover of Life magazine, and it's this just incredibly emotive, powerful, dramatic image of this young 12-year-old boy lying on the concrete with a pool of blood underneath him, where he had been hit by police gunfire. And he did survive. He was shot in the neck and the thigh. His body is sort of, in the image that they used on the cover of Life, his body is sort of almost contorted into a question mark. It's a very powerful, dramatic image. And, pretty much unlike any other image that I saw on the cover of Life magazine up until that time and since. I mean, Life isn't published anymore, but Life magazine, a lot of the images they used on the cover were pretty innocuous. This image is undeniable. I mean, it's a child who has been, seriously wounded by police gunfire. It was I think it was a groundbreaking image, in terms of the kind of coverage that Life magazine offered of these events and the kind of image that Americans weren't used to seeing of these events as well. So the photographs that Budley took of Billy Furr's killing by the police ran inside the magazine in an article called The Killing of Billy Furr, which was also pretty unprecedented for the kind of coverage that Life magazine would offer of, sort of subjects like this. So, yeah, that's. I mean, and we basically the book that I edited. We found a bunch more images that had never been published of Billy Furr's death and the aftermath, and the aftermath of Joey Bass being wounded. And I think we used all but one of the images that Budley shot, and I separated them from the rest of the images in the book because I really wanted people to live that moment as Budley was seeing it through the lens of his camera. So, moment by moment, the photographs are in sequence. I just felt that was the most powerful and impactful way to show these images. I wanted people to really understand the gravity of what went on and just the weight of it, really.
Yes, and I think, my opinion, and I'm not a book critic at all, this book is very powerful. It really touched me deeply because I had no clue what went on in Newark. I heard of the riots. There were riots around New Jersey. I had no idea that the National Guard was called in. I mean, it looks like a war zone when you look at these pictures. There is a picture of a Newark police officer standing over Joey Bassett Jr., but what I take from that photograph is it didn't look, it was like a neutering was giving. It looked more like he had him, like he was pressing his hand on his back. May not have been, but that's just what it looked like. It didn't look like there was any TLC, tender living care, coming from this officer. Now, I'm not bashing police officers, folks. They do a good job. But this is what I get from that image, from that picture.
Yeah, and there's another image that's sort of in that sequence that actually won like a Budley, the News Photographer of the Year award, and it's the photograph of Joey Bass Jr. He's lying on the street. There's a crowd of onlookers that have gathered around, horrified by what they're seeing. And the police officer, who is one of the police officers who had shot at him and wounded him, is standing above him, holding a rifle in one hand, and he's chewing a cigar. And it's a very, it's just a very powerful image. And it kind of speaks to what you were saying as well. I mean, I think, Budley talked also about Billy Furr and actually, how they left him to die on the sidewalk. While the ambulance waited to come and pick him up. And, by the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. And, I think you get a sense of how both of these individuals, Billy Furr and Joey Bass, were treated after they had been shot.
Yes, it's a very sad commentary of that time. I have to ask, Chris, how did you get the mayor of Newark to say a forward in the book, Ras Baraka?
So I approached the mayor's office to ask if he would be interested in writing an introduction. And part of the reason I did that was that as well as the events on the street in Newark, Budley returned to Newark towards the end of July 1967 to photograph the first national conference on Black Power, which was a sort of convocation of groups and individuals who were really, it was a turning point in between the civil rights era of Martin Luther King Jr. and the sort of Black Power era. And sort of basically because of the events that had happened in Newark, they decided to hold this conference on Black Power in Newark. And there was a press conference held at a place called the Spirit House, which was home to the writer and playwright Amiri Baraka, who was then known as Leroy Jones. And Amiri Baraka is the father of Ras Baraka, the current mayor of Newark. So there are photographs of Ras Baraka's father in the book. Ras Baraka's father was beaten by police severely at the beginning of these events in July '67. And so when Budley photographed him at his house in Newark, he still has the bandages on his head from where he was beaten by the police. And the last photo of the book is a photograph of Amiri Baraka, Ras Baraka's father. So I felt like he had a personal connection to these images, and I knew he had a personal connection to these events. And so he agreed to write an introduction. And it's a very powerful text that really connects the events of 1967 with the events that we know all too well from, current times. He draws a through line from, what happened in Newark to the murder of George Floyd and to, the BLM protests of the summer of 2020. And I just think, that was something that was really on my mind, because we started working on this book in the summer of 2020 when the National Guard had been sent into D.C. to police the protests over the death of George Floyd. So the connections between then and now were very foremost in my mind, and I'm really pleased that Ras Baraka really drew that through line from, really based on his own personal family history, to make that connection explicit.
Yes, and then you think, I think, have we learned anything? Has anything changed in all these years?
I think the thing that's changed is a measure of accountability that didn't exist. I mean, there were 26 people officially lost their lives in Newark. There were 24 people that died at the hands of police gunfire. Then there was a cop and a fireman that also died. None of those families of the people that died in Newark in 1967 received any kind of accountability whatsoever. There was a grand jury that was set up to investigate deaths by police gunfire or National Guard gunfire, and they did not hand down any indictments whatsoever. So none of those people had any kind of restitution, any kind of justice for the death of their loved ones. I think that's the main thing that's changing now with the advent of cheap, easily available technology for taking photographs. We see these images, more often than we really should, but because we see the images, there's a public outrage that forces some measure of accountability. And
yes,
I think that's the main thing that's changed.
Yes, everyone has their cameras out. To put in perspective for the young adults who listen to my show, back then you didn't know how your pictures looked until they were developed. You went to the drugstore, you got your pictures developed, or you sent them through a mail order to get it developed. So Bud Lee he probably didn't realize what the picture looked like until after the film was developed, or if he had what do you call those things? Not the pictures. Oh, my mind just went blank. Polaroid, the slides. That's it.
Right.
They used to have these slides things.
People didn't carry cameras around with them, so
right.
News was, news photographs was the main way that people learned about events, and if there was a news photographer on hand to capture events, then that's how these photographs appeared. It's extraordinary that Budley was even at that place at really I'd say the wrong place at the wrong time. But he did capture these images. There was similar things that happened in LA in Watts in 1965. I think there were over 30 people killed by police gunfire in Watts. There were no images of people being shot and killed by the police. I've looked, and I don't know that there were any photographs like this published in a mainstream American magazine prior to Bud Lee's photographs being published. So at that time in the 60s, it was extremely rare, even after that, extremely rare to see things like this. I think the only thing that happened after it is really the beating of Rodney King that was captured on videotape and also had a huge impact. I think that's one, is a terrible sort of benefit of having easy access to technology where people can take photographs or video on their phone, but it has forced a measure of accountability.
Yes, it's instant now, instant news, but back in the 60s, no cell phones. I even forgot when the Polaroid camera came out where you had it instantly, and that was very, new tech for that time. It had to be in the maybe early 70s or late 60s when you could see the picture right away. But
right.
As you were taking pictures, I know I had a little Kodak, I think it was called 110. You didn't know. I had no idea what your pictures were going to look like.
And Bud Lee was photographing on color slide film as well, which is a very difficult medium to photograph on because you only get one chance. It's not like you have negatives where you can alter the image afterwards and make it darker or lighter, and if you make mistakes, you can maybe get a good image out of it. Once you take a photograph on slide film, that's it. It's fixed. And we didn't have computers where we could, manipulate the image at that time either. So, he really didn't know. He had never used color slide film prior to going to Newark. He'd only shot on black and white prior to that. So it was new to him. He had also broken two of his cameras 2 days in the first day that he was in Newark. So he had one camera with a manual wind on it, and he just took photographs, just clicked the shutter and took them as he saw what was happening in front of him. So it's really a miracle that these pictures even exist. And he didn't know what he had. He took, I think, as I said, maybe like 300 images. He didn't think he had anything that was usable by Life magazine. So when the photographs appeared on the cover of the magazine and inside, I think he was more surprised than anybody.
Wow, it's such an amazing and powerful book that I think, my opinion again, this book, The War is Here, should be in every bookstore in New Jersey, especially New Jersey, because this is where it happened. And people have forgotten, except maybe the people of Newark, or relatives of those people who were killed. I don't think a lot of people now have remembered, especially they were young like me, or maybe they were, they're older, like my mom. But this history needs to be told. And I thank you for telling Bud Lee's story and these photographs. How did you become the archivist to his pictures?
Well, really, I mean, I was kind of working as an archivist just to, find a way of putting a book out of his images. So it was really just, there was nobody else doing it. So I'm not necessarily working as an archivist. Now I sort of transitioned to basically just, working as an editor on this book. So, but, there wasn't anybody to look for these images or to put them together. So there's 110 images in the book. And he took a lot of other great images, but these ones, just sort of worked together. And I really tried to find a way of telling a story that wasn't, we've talked a lot about the images of Billy Fair and Joey Bass, but there are a lot of other images in the book that were really just about daily life in Newark during these events, for, how people people walking down the street, sitting, reflecting on this sort of ruined landscape of Newark. And they're all, very powerful, emotive images in their own way, and sort of speak to, how dramatic, how these events really transformed the city. There are photographs of burned out buildings. There are photographs of black-owned businesses with, bullet holes in the windows because the National Guard and the police would basically, went around shooting them up. A lot of the black-owned businesses would paint or write Soul Brother on the windows to let other people know that they were black-owned businesses. And apparently, a certain point in time during these events, for the 5 days that this was occurring in Newark, the police and the National Guard sort of went on a sort of, basically sort of retribution and, fired into a lot of these businesses. So, a lot of the photographs document things like that and really just the effect that these events had on the people in Newark.
Yes, and then there's, generational, they say generational post-traumatic, when a horrible event happens and then it affects the next generation, which I'm sure has happened to the survivors of those who have died. Billy Furr's wife, how do you pronounce her name, Chris? Is it Aline?
Yes, Aline.
The letter that she wrote to her husband, I tell you what, I had tears reading this letter, probably because I'm a widow myself. And I just, it was just very heart-touching when she talked about didn't get any justice for what happened to him. I can't even imagine that she wasn't married. They weren't married that, long of a time, but to lose your husband such a horrible way is just tragic. What, I know I'm going back and forth because that's how my mind works. What caused the lockdown and the National Guard coming in?
So basically there was the event that sparked all of this was the arrest and beating by police of a cab driver in Newark called John Smith, who took a wrong turn, pulled over by the police, was arrested, taken to the precinct, and beaten very severely by the police. And there were rumors that he had been killed in police custody. So a crowd formed around the precinct and just incredibly frustrated. And basically that was the spark for all the other events that transpired. So, there were 2 days of sort of looting and burning of buildings and businesses in Newark that was really just an expression of the frustration by the black majority population at the heavy-handed tactics of the police in Newark that were not just about the beating of John Smith, but something that was endemic in Newark at that time. But also there were a lot of issues related to corruption, governmental corruption in Newark at the time. So it was pure frustration on the part of the black majority population. And after 2 days, the police director, Dominic Spina, called the governor and told him that things were out of control in Newark, and the governor called in the National Guard. So at that point, the National Guard came in, and there was a curfew instituted, and there were roadblocks set up in the city. It's at that point that there's a community organizer who I put a quote in the book, and he talks about how the the police and the National Guard sort of enacted a retribution for the first 2 days of these events in Newark. 26 people died. There were 10,414 bullets used by the National Guard and the police over 5 days.
Wow.
I think there were 8 people killed in the first 2 days, including, a grandmother who was hit by police gunfire. The police would basically strafe apartment buildings, like tower, tall apartment, high-rise apartment buildings with gunfire, supposedly because they were being fired upon by snipers. But this was not. There were these sort of phantom snipers that were supposedly firing at police, and the police would basically just fire back and go from top to bottom in a building. And a lot of, there were people killed who were just standing at windows in their apartments. There was another 10-year-old boy who was shot and killed when the National Guard opened fire on his family car when they were on their way to White Castle for dinner. They were approaching a roadblock, and the National Guard just fired into the car, and this young boy was shot and killed. So these situations were occurring all over the city.
It is just horribly tragic. It seemed like there was no restraint on part of the National Guard or the police.
They were actually, Bud Lee's photographs helped, cast a light on this. Basically after these events in July '67, Governor Hughes set up a commission to investigate the cause and to really investigate, the reaction from the authorities. And there were 2 African American members of that commission who were both attorneys, and the commission was set up to interview people and to really sort of document what had gone on and how and why. And there was an interview with Dominic Spina, who was the police director in Newark. And he had issued a command fairly early on in these events over the police radio. And the command was to the Newark police, if you have a gun, use it. It was an ambiguous command. And so, that's probably what resulted in a lot of these extrajudicial killings by police of people, for many of them for no reason whatsoever. And so when Dominic Spina was giving an interview for the commission, he was directly asked about the murder of Billy Furr and the images in Life magazine that Bud Lee took. And these 2 members of the commission said, was this a justified use of force to shoot a man in the back and kill him for looting a can of beer? And Dominic Spina had no answer. I mean, ultimately his answer was no, it wasn't. But he made up a bunch of excuses prior to that, which, did not have any basis in fact. But, I just think, because Bud Lee took these images, there was, a focus on police behavior in Newark at that time. If he hadn't taken in the images, there wouldn't be documentary proof of what had gone on. But, it's incredibly important that he did take these photographs. And, hopefully, I think even now, with similar events occurring across the country, far too often, hopefully there's a measure of accountability that comes from documentary evidence of these things occurring.
Absolutely. I have to tell you, Chris, that my dad grew up in Newark in the 30s, and He went off to the war in the 40s, and he told me, I mean, this is way back when, that if you were standing at the street corner, the police would take out their billy clubs and just knock you right on your knees, just club you, and say, you better get off the street. And, that was then. And so I think the Newark police, and, don't send me hate mail, folks. I think they have a reputation back then of being a little rough. And, of course, as we know in the riots, what had happened, to me, it's just a travesty. And I sure hope that we could bring back our humanity for each other. Of course, I say this all the time. We need to be kind. We need to learn and to accept each other. We're more alike than we are different. And, I guess I am one of those people that grew up in the 60s and 70s that believe in, peace and getting along and brotherhood. We all want the same things for our families and ourselves, right? We all want, shelter, be safe, a place to live, a roof over our heads, food, our families being safe. Everybody wants that. And that's like, why can't we just, as Rodney King said, why can't we just get along?
Right.
And I hope to see that in my lifetime.
I should say that there was change in Newark after these events, and I think that's something that we should be looking at as well. There was, essentially it was a black majority city that had a white power structure, white governor, white mayor, white, police director. There was a lot of corruption. A lot of that was, these events sort of cast a light on a lot of that. There were quite a lot of people, including the mayor of Newark, indicted for corruption. And what happened afterwards was, in 1970, there was the election of the first black mayor in Newark, Kenneth Gibson. And that is something that has continued on through administrations of Sharp James and Cory Booker, who's now the senator of New Jersey, and the current mayor, Ras Baraka. And so I think there has been change in Newark. The city had a lot of problems. It took a lot of work to, kind of rebuild the city from these events in '67. I think maybe last year or the year before, there was a year where there were no killings by police. It was the first year where there had been no killings by police, possibly, in a certain, long period of time. I think there have been police reforms instituted. Ras Baraka comes from a family of political activists and, very much community minded. And so there are definitely changes that are happening in Newark. And I'm not from there, clearly, so I can't really speak to that. But, the city's, I would say, is in a much better place than it was in 1967 and prior.
Well, that's a positive thing. That's a good thing. It's kind of crazy in a way that there was these riots and these killings here on the East Coast and on the West Coast. It was the Summer of Love, Monterey Festival, and such a contrast of what was going on. And I don't even know what year it was. I live like 45 minutes south of Newark. I live in Woodbridge Township, closer to like Staten Island, New York. And in Carteret, which is the town I grew up in, I remember my grandfather calling my dad and saying, Chrome is on fire, there's riots. And it was kind of scary, I was a little girl. And to, hear that, but I guess I was kind of sheltered, or we were shielded by what was going on. I mean, not that at 9 years old I looked at Life magazine, just didn't know, about what was happening in the world around me at that time. We were, it was kind of like an innocent time. If you were a child, you were kind of shielded from the reality. And I just think that I give you kudos, Chris, for putting these pictures together, and I think it's a way to bring people together. It is a book that we can learn from and move forward. I think it's honor to Bud Lee's memory, this book, and I just want to say thank you. Kudos to you, because I think it takes a brave person, in my opinion, to put a book like this together with the pictures that are just it's outstanding. It's a masterpiece, folks. This book is a masterpiece, and I encourage people to buy it. And if you don't see it in your local bookstore, ask them for it. The war is here.
Or even ask in your local library if they could order it as well. Because I'm very much, I would like people to own the book, but I think it's important that it's in libraries as well, and it stays in libraries so people can go in and look at it at their own leisure. But really, I wanted to put this book together so it sort of existed and people could reflect on these events.
Well, I thank you. Thank you for coming on Chatting with Betsy. I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate having a copy of this book. As a matter of fact, I told my son, Josh, I said, here, you're going to have to take a look at this book and read it and find out, what happened. It's really it's a masterpiece. That's the word I could use, Chris. It's phenomenal.
Thank you, Betsy.
You're welcome.
Thank you for asking me on, and thank you for your interest and enthusiasm. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. And I wish you a lot of success on this book and your future books, because I can see, where you might put another book together. And I hope that you do put another book together. You're welcome. You're welcome. Folks, you heard Chris Campion. He's the editor. The War is Here. Photos that Bud Lee took. It has a history about Newark in it. It is a phenomenal book, and I highly recommend that you go to your local bookstore, library. If they don't have it, then tell them to order it. And if anyone who was listening to me that's in the New Jersey news media, you need to interview Chris Campion. You need to interview Chris about this book. It is a part of New Jersey history that should not be forgotten. And I want to thank Lisa Warren for arranging this interview. She is the publicist, PR of Lisa Warren Publicity. And I want to thank you, the audience, for listening. If you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, please do so. It is for free on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeart, to name just a few. And I would like to thank Jeannie White, who's station manager, who writes the blog and produces the show. I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Perpetual Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And folks, please share the show. It's to help people. My show is about helping people. I have all different guests on all walks of life. We should not forget our history. And I had to put in a shameless plug here for the show that I am a co-host of with Lillian Caldwell and Lisa Skinner, Lest We Forget, because we are uncovering the dark past of America. We need to talk about what happened in America. That's not pretty. It's tragic, actually. But we need to talk about it and bring it to light. And that's what we're doing on Lest We Forget, which is at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, live. You can catch us on YouTube. And I think you would really enjoy that show. And that's what I have to say today, folks. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright, because if we all did that, it would be a much kinder and brighter world. Thank you for listening today. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.